Hello, everyone. This is episode 4, which I can't really quite believe that we're over halfway through this wonderful webinar series already. John Taylor has had lots of great guests so far that have given excellent insights, and today is no exception. So, joining John is Brook Schoenfield, Chief Technology Officer and Chief Security Architect at Resilient Software Security. Brook has also written many books, is a founding member, along with John, for Threat Modeling Connect, and he's a co-author of the well-known and well-referenced Threat Modeling Manifesto. I've probably missed off lots of other accolades, so feel free to add them later on, Brook, as well. And then he's shaking his head. And just to recap, John is Senior Application Security Architect at Deloitte with many years of experience in rolling out threat modeling programs as well, which is why John wanted to do this series in the first place, and we are very grateful. So wanted to thank you both for being here. And we've now got another great hour of content that we're going to be providing to you listening. So I will hand the mic over to you, John, to kick off episode 4.
Right. Right. Thank you for the introduction, Claire. So, and Brooks, thank you for being here with us as well today. So, just a quick little slide here on our agenda. I want to talk a little bit about our series and the introduction of that and what to expect. And then we'll dive into some topics here and basically kind of get into things around driving your threat modeling program. And I think it's important to understand what that means and kind of as you grow and build your program, where do we start going next? And so let's just keep moving forward. Simple disclaimer, this is just talking about, these are my views, not the place where I work. Standard kind of boilerplate stuff. Series introduction. So this is a 6-part series. And basically we are on episode 4, like Claire mentioned, we're just over halfway through. So I'm honored to have Brooke with me here today. You can see we have 5 and 6 coming up in December, so that'll be really good to wrap things up. And it's quite exciting. And you have the 3 there. One of the things about the series is about long-term success, value delivery of your program, especially when you've started and you kind of like, where do I go next? How do I grow this? What are the things I look out for? This is not a how-to threat model series. We do talk about some of that. So even if you've never threat modeled before, you'll still find a lot of valuable content and stuff that you can be thinking about as you begin your journey. One of the things about this series is we build on each one. So I highly recommend you go back and look at previous sessions if you have not been with us so far. So that continues to grow, and it's very nice that these do get published later. So they'll be available online for you to view. So it's a little bit about the series introductions, kind of expectations that, what you'll find for each one of these. And also, of course, we do leave you with some key takeaways on each session so that way you'll have some stuff to go back to wherever you work and what you may be doing and things that you can look at on how you might apply those to where you're at with your program and where you are in threat modeling. One of the things that we always like to do too in the series is to kind of recap what we had on the last time. Last session on episode 3, I had Robert Hurl with me. It was a really great experience, and we were talking about the adoption of threat modeling. Adoption of threat modeling, of course, is a great part of your program because if you're not adopting threat modeling, it's really kind of hard to build a big program around that, whether it be small or large, actually. So one of the big key things was around time. Time's important to build your program. One of the other things was around value. Show that. It's important. Show the output. Show value from what you're doing. We talked about grassroots, targeting teams. We talked about making entry of threat modeling easy as possible. So this doesn't have to be difficult, right? And talked about using existing processes, trying not to create a whole new thing, inject where it works. We talked briefly about leveraging security champions. A lot of great stuff out there about security champions. And we also talked a little bit about technology and the thing, in terms of what people may use today and what there may be some specific tooling. Here there is a link, and I know that can be shared. Maybe Claire, you can add that into the chat or something. So, oh, yeah, you've already done it. Thank you. So that's basically it. So what we want to do is we want to just dive right in. So really around driving the program, what does it take to continue delivery of a value-driven threat modeling program? I think that's kind of one of the big questions that I hear a lot from people. And then how do I keep this going? All right, so let's just kind of dig in.
All right. I wish it was entirely technical and you could just train all the people, put in whatever tools you need, and say, job done, I walk away. But
That,
sustainment is actually where the rubber meets the road in a very
uh,
big way, John. And you know this,
yeah,
and I know it. But let's help viewers understand that sustainment is actually the big piece. And not to push one of my books, but I tried to get into Secrets of a Cybersecurity Architect as much of this, of what I do, as possible, and not to refer to experts. But it's interesting your guest list, because we're all friends. People don't know
yeah,
that actually among the people who really do theorize and talk about threat modeling, we mostly know each other. It's pretty maybe
yeah,
even incestuous is the right thing. And I saw from Robert a whole bunch of things that I would have talked about, except
yeah,
Robert talked about them, right? So
yeah,
sustain,
absolutely.
let me go to people. And this is, for engineers, it's going to be like, okay, people, I don't know. Do I actually have to talk to people? Yes.
Yeah,
More so than anything else, once it gets going and people are really starting to get interested and move, there are two things that I use to my advantage. One, I try to create a community of practice, to make it something that we do and we share and we work together on. Because it's easy to make mistakes when threat modeling. I'm going to be public, really public here, and a bit vulnerable. I'm going to tell the audience I have made gross mistakes even recently, because it's easy to miss something or get hyper focused on one aspect, or miss something that went by really fast, and not dig into it enough. It's easy to do that.
yeah,
So bringing it to community in a couple of different ways really helps, because when we all realize that we're limited human beings and imperfect, and we bring it to each other, we can review each other's work. And one of the
absolutely.
things that this whole crew of people, many of whom are either in Threat Modeling Connect, or authors of the manifesto, or swirling in that
Yeah,
crew together, often talk about amongst ourselves, is inclusion. John, have you found in your universe that when you start to include people, suddenly the mistakes get easier to find because people
they
notice
they
things?
they do actually, and I think you make a great point about this involvement of people working together on these things that basically helps drive that. And I think, when you look at, driving your overall program, when you start working with teams, we have examples where I'm at where we have different groups that we're starting to work with. And then those, I mean, just that community involvement, we really start to see more value. We find more things to really focus in on as opposed to like, oh, well, okay, yeah, whatever on this, or you missed something. And a lot of times with other processes, and when we complement things, we find more, the things that they've missed, and so on and so forth. So it's a really kind of a nice way where things kind of come together, and
And
it certainly adds to it. And
there's a sense of this shared experience,
yeah,
because it turns out where we put effort, that's where we find our passion. So I just
absolutely.
wanted to interject that as, part of, as you tell us about your, how you're driving yours, and please continue, that there's this sense of sharedness that's very powerful.
Absolutely.
I'm going to drop another thing in there in a minute, but finish what you were saying. Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, no, no, I think it's a really important point to kind of start that and set that stage about that, because I think that's key. And we do mention this here on another slide in a little bit about community. And I think that that's an ongoing thing. So what we have here is around in our program, and it's like, are you really prepared to deliver this? And, as I look at this and as I'm growing a program, it was like, okay, are we really ready? In earlier sessions, we talked about what is it, scopes and definitions, and how do we go and all of that. And it was like, okay, so are we actually ready, right? You do need to be ready, right? Because it might move faster than you think. It's entirely possible that you'll get a group that's like, I'm going to threat model everything we make. And I actually have a group that's doing that. We're going to threat model everything, period. one apps already in production and ones that we're creating new. And it's like I see more models show up every single day. It's like it's just a list that's ongoing. So we didn't think they'd go that fast, but they're moving. Um,
Yeah, no, people
so
really enjoy jumping in, don't they? Some, and you always have
some,
some laggards. So that's another
yeah,
piece you have to understand. You always have some people who are, yeah, I'm too busy for that. Don't bother me with that. And you have
yeah,
some people who are at the forward edge. We all know about the, curve of adoption and
yeah,
the Valley of Despair, isn't it called? Or the Abyss of Despair? I forget what it's called.
yeah,
We all know about that, and we've seen that, in a lot of presentations. But it actually is part of this. Is
yeah,
at some point
absolutely.
you're going to find these early adopters who want to jump in and they want to know. But one of the
Yeah,
things that I found, and I don't know if it's in any of our slides, and I don't care, it needs to be said, and we probably come back to it. When things are happening, people who are looking to grow their careers and who want to learn something new jump on. That's not everybody, but when people see that things are actually changing, it's very attractive. Do
yeah,
not ever underestimate the power of just making change for the better. It's got to be seen as
yeah,
having value. But when people see something as value is changing, you'll get a bunch of people who weren't really interested at first, but see it going and say, hey, I want to jump in there too, because that looks like a ship that's moving and it looks like it's going to make things better. And I like to make things better at work. Never
yeah,
refuse help from those people, no matter how skilled or unskilled, it doesn't matter. You
yeah,
want all those people because that's your tipping point that
yeah.
moves everybody forward.
So, all right. So continuing forward here, just a couple of key points on being prepared. One thing is always when we look at our programs and driving them is keeping scale in mind with everything that you do. What happens when you have 150 models to keep track of, right? So when you have different groups and what they're doing, and then also too, it's like you need to stay on top of this. Don't fall behind with what's going on in your community and what's happening,
Can
and
I
you
tell a
need to see
story
that.
about that, John? Can I tell a story
I
about
don't,
that?
I don't know how much time we got, but let me just finish this up a little bit,
All right,
and
okay.
then one of the things that
I'd
and
like
you and
to
I talked
come
about,
back to that
yeah,
scale because I've got a great story. It was a hard
yeah.
lesson, but go on, please.
Yeah, so one of the things you and I talk about is around keeping your door open, and that's really around making sure that you're there and available. You've got to be there. And also too, is you're delivering the program, get feedback. How are we doing? Is this model of delivery working? Is our program working for somebody? Because you might deliver it in different ways. I talked about that with Adam Showstack on episode 1 on different ways we look at delivering of a program. And really, I think it's important that you have this, gather up your data and your feedback and really continue to look at this. And this helps you be ready and you're prepared for scale. You're prepared for continuing forward and having that visibility. So when you have a design and scope of your program, you need to be ready to really continue it. And having a plan in place, it doesn't have to be this elaborate, complex thing, but just some key things and the things that I've talked about in previous sessions, like with Irene and Robert. Um, we kind of laid those things out, but this is really kind of, keeping that scale in mind and everything that you do when you look at these programs, even if you're a small organization, where can that go? Where is that going to grow? And keep in mind that for your organization, where I'm at, it's huge, right? So we have to look at how do we deliver this? How is this going to grow across the globe, right? Thousands upon thousands of applications. How do we look at that? But I might be at a company where I've got 5 products. Well, there's things there that how do I continue the life cycle of that? So keep that in mind. And by the way, having 150 models to keep track of is not a bad thing.
No,
So
no, it's great.
that's a
Although
that's a good thing to have.
we've been keeping all of our risk, which is part of the model, our risk assessments
Yeah.
and all of our notes in a central repository. And when we scaled, and it was quite the first time, this is really early, like 2004. And there weren't that many champion programs. Nobody talked
Yeah.
about it. There had been a few. I found out later. We thought we were the one and only the first because we co-invented it. Parallel invented it for ourselves, but at Cisco. But so we had this thing when we were a tight little team, a way to keep everything. And as soon as we opened it up over the course of the first year, all of our
Mhm.
very empowered, wonderful champions who were learning how to threat model and learning how to deliver were keeping their models for themselves because they didn't understand the central. And our
Yeah.
complete ability to have data on what everyone was doing.
Yeah.
And we had counted on people doing it the way we'd done it, and it was a complete failure. That part of it, it was a
Yeah.
hard lesson that, oh, we should have planned for people being decentralized because that's the
Yeah.
model.
And that's where we go here when we talk about growing and scaling and expanding. Like I mentioned, like, oh, I have 150 models. And if you have these from different groups, they just won't stop making them, right? If that, that's success. You've got people modeling, but you got to scale and grow this with your friends, with your community, being ready for, that. And as I mentioned before, that plan, like, what is it? It doesn't have to be super complex, but how are you going to support fast growth, slow growth, to think that I have a long list here of different things and just some key points to pull out. Um, Start small. I've talked about that a lot. Just get started. Really, just start doing it. Let it grow. Work with different groups. That's going to be really based on your organization. Some other things is you got to be prepared to support and train as you grow. Think about that. Train trainers. Leverage champions if you have a champions program. If you don't have a champions program, please consider building one because that goes a long way to really help out. Other things too, repeatable processes, technology can help as well. There's plenty of products out there, both manual, open source, commercial, so on and so forth. Um, as you mentioned too, as you talked about decentralized and gathering the data to be able to get lessons from your own models. You and I spoke too about some things around growing your community, drives programs at the same time. Um, and another thing too is find the detractors and bring them along. And that was interesting that we spoke about, not long ago, Brooke. And I think you may want to add a few statements around that. So, and you'll see some other stuff. I don't have to speak this all out loud, but I think you'll find that some of these are very interested. Um,
Well,
but
the detractors, that's really an interesting point because there will be people who are either disinterested, they're busy with their whatever, or they have reasons for not wanting to do this. Jim Manico, who we many of us know fairly well, and he's probably one of the greatest um, coding instructors, secure coding instructors on the planet. If people don't know who he is. Really, really talented and passionate for AppSec and coding security and security in general. But
yeah,
Jim was really a detractor for threat modeling for years. And you have people, they have their reasons. They're smart people and they look at maybe how dysfunctional what's happening is, and they say, hey, that doesn't work. Let's do it a different way. And those people, you have to bring them along or at least work around them. But
hmm
you have to bring them along because, if you can bring them to your side, as Jim has come to realize that the way we think about threat modeling today is not what he didn't like years ago.
yeah,
Right. And so he's a big supporter today. I mean, I don't want to speak for him, but you go look at what he says. He's plenty out there. But those, if you can bring them along, and sometimes detractors are protecting something. They're afraid your program will undo something they need. That may not be something they feel comfortable articulating, but if you can find out what that is and include it in the program and just let them protect what they need to protect and
yeah,
have what they have that works for them and work around it and work it included. And that's what that
yeah,
community meeting is about. That community
absolutely.
is to bring people and say what's not working just as much as what's working. So people have a chance in a vulnerable and safe way to say, the way this tool is being used doesn't work with our flow,
Right.
for
Yep,
instance,
exactly.
just pick something. And then you can work with that and realize, okay, we can have multiple flows or whatever the solution is. And then they come
Absolutely.
to your side. And that's very powerful too.
I think that's a key thing, and Robert and I spoke about that on the last sessions around finding where things fit. I don't want to disrupt. I want to complement. I want to add additional value. And that is where one of the key things in the growth of your program to find these detractors. So recently, we were working with a group, and I know from the past they were a little skeptical on this, and like, I don't know. So we reviewed something that they were working on, and it was the piece that they were working on, and they had some concerns. I'm like, okay, you know what? Let's go ahead and do this, and let's see what we get. Right? Didn't we just needed some information from them. We went and took it. We did the model. We looked at it, spoke to one of the security folks, and also then met with their architects and their solution engineers. And they're like, wow, there's a lot of value in this. So now we have the whole big app that we're working on, right? It's multiple components. It's like like the director was like, this is helpful. This is the kind of stuff we need to know. And so it's really, you find when you start meeting and talking and you just keep at it, it grows. So that's kind of, what we see here.
You
So
know,
one of the other
you
things,
highlighted, John, really
with it,
important is the thing you said right at the beginning. You've got to demonstrate value. And,
yes.
when I start a program, it's me doing the threat modeling to start out. I show at least a few people, hey, look, this has value. It's going to be great for you. It's
Mm-hmm.
going to be better. And that just right there. So it's called pro-social modeling. Just so you know, there's a name
Yeah.
for this. You can go look, people can go look at that up.
Yeah.
You're modeling not only the way the value, but also the way you
Yeah.
want the program to happen. And that's
Absolutely.
very important because people, if you're leading, they take cues from you.
Yeah, so that, this slide here, we talk about that value delivery, and just sort of my quote here is around things can grow, they become unwieldy to the point where we don't know if we're meeting our needs. So not to mention, are we delivering with quality? We got to measure and show this value constantly and consistently. So that way people, they're willing to adopt. We're actually helping, So we think about different ways of how do we look at that, right? So talk about how do we enable to save time and money, the value delivered from our modeling efforts. We think about ways, and I think a lot of people have talked about these topics: increased delivery velocity. How do we help teams get there quicker? A lot of times, security has always been that toll gate, block, block, block. And if we do this early on, we're giving them the information they need to build a more secure product. One of the things is around some metrics, and I've got more coming on that. And so I know, Brooke, and you had a really important metric to consider was how many requirements were built then implemented. You remember that from a threat model. So we look at the countermeasures that we determine of like, what are we going to do about it? And then a 4-question framework. And so we wrote down a few things to think about. And some of these are pretty simple and easy to think about, but really it's like, how do we measure what value is being delivered so that way we can go back and look at how we expand, how do we further grow, how do we look at resources and things that we need to move that forward, right? And so
Yeah,
these last two that you
it's
spoke
really
about, Brooke, when we
hard.
talked, those were big
Yeah,
points.
very hard to measure some of this because it gets to be a little watery. One of the things you don't want to do is say, how many requirements did you write? Because
Yeah,
maybe the team, maybe the team got it all, or they're going into an infrastructure where it's all, and they don't need much. Or how many projects did you turn because one person has a really
right.
complex one, it's the only one they're working on, and another person has 10 small things. None of those work well. So don't use those. I just want to say, don't use these
Yeah.
metrics that people have tried that don't actually show you much.
And
And
that kind of comes to
as you
that point
said,
of like,
yeah, I really like requirements built because that shows effectiveness. If you're actually building the requirements, that's what
mhm.
that's the value in the end to the
Yeah,
company, the
absolutely.
organization.
Yeah, I think that is, and that's sort of a great way for, leadership to understand like how much we're doing as a result of this, how much more are we able to accomplish and better secure. And this kind of brings us into our next section as
Can we
well
just
about,
grab the exceptions because people may not understand that very
yes,
quickly.
yeah, thank you.
If you have no exceptions, if an architect or whoever's doing the threat modeling, the team, that there's never any push-pull between security and other things, that's a sign that the person is or the work is not being very effective because it's
Yeah,
a tension. There are a lot of competing things. So there should be some exceptions. If there's none, that's something wrong. I'm not saying what's wrong, but that's a red flag,
Yeah.
over the space of a year. And if it's always exceptions, that's a people problem. Because it's the person's not, whoever's doing the work, whoever's leading the work is causing a lot of dissension, and there shouldn't be. It should be obvious value, and people should be able to work it out. So those are two things that I use. Is there no exceptions? That's a red flag. Lots of exceptions. That's probably a people problem that I need to address.
Yeah, absolutely. Because then you get, as you model more, you get a better idea of your landscape of products, and you get a better sense like, why are they always saying no to these particular things that are common? You don't really want that. Right? You want to have those things become a common countermeasure, thing that you should be building, right? It's like, it's almost like, you're doing scans and pen tests. Like why do I always get cross-site scripting? Why do I always have SQL injection? It's like, why do we keep doing the same thing over and over and over again? And this applies here as well. Like, why do we keep doing and designing it this way? We know we shouldn't, right? So it's a great point. So as we look more towards the program and we want to think about supporting groups, where else does this program support the rest of your organization? And a lot of times we get stuck in this sort of tunnel vision of like, okay, we're threat modeling and delivering value. Where does it extend? And this is kind of where we start thinking about the outputs and the life cycle. We kind of know a bit about the life cycle, a new product or whatever it is you're working on, you model, what are we going to do about it? We validate things. And we kind of have a whole life cycle of our model in a particular product. And we do more models, we find commonalities and adjust and adapt and do things with that. But I think, one of the things that I've been saying for a while, it's like a foundation in your product security program as well, right? So it taps into so much more. And then we look at how this value, it further drives, it's further driving your programming to becoming a common practice. And there's other areas in the organization that matter and you can support and they support you. Part of that community, as we mentioned, it's you start to share and learn. And I listed some areas here that we think about. And a lot of this stuff is mostly security, but there's still areas too in data risk and privacy. But security operations, incident response, threat intelligence, I get a lot of support and collaboration with those teams because in threat modeling, you have a proactive and a reactive capability. So they're really coming together, and we're going to dive into a bit more of these. But you can see here, there's roughly I have six teams listed in places where this enhances your capability and enhances your cyber program as a whole. And that's why I find this kind of a foundation to your product security program overall. This really kind of sets things up for a larger success in terms of building more secure apps and enhancing your security program, to build resilience in what you have.
Do you want John to help people understand? I mean, probably privacy by design is obvious.
Yeah.
And if you're not doing that, why not? But yeah. I wonder if you want to help people understand that the threat intelligence tells us if something's changing in the threat landscape. Really important. I always include my ops and my cloud as part of the software itself personally. But let's think about testing. Your threat model needs to be proved.
Yeah, we got a moment on that too coming up here in just a bit.
Yeah,
yeah, go ahead.
Because it has to be proved in order to know whether you got it right. And there's where operations and testing come in. They're interested in the model so that they can think about what we think we protected against, your security architecture, if you're lucky enough and have enough time to actually do one, because that's the point. And so your testing regime, the model tells you what to test.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
Your manual pen tester, the thinking about stuff you didn't potentially think about in the threat model, that's where that comes in. They get the threat model, hopefully, and then they work from there and maybe find things you didn't think about or prove that you did actually work comprehensive. That all of that is one piece, actually. It's not disconnected and we should talk to
Yeah.
these groups. They're all part of threat modeling completely.
Yeah, absolutely. And so we got a little slide that I put together here talking about different types of your app scans. And, we always find in a threat model, there's, okay, so out of browser, an application is, a web app, standard stuff, maybe a 3-tier or whatever. But it's like what that can happen in an attack perspective in those threats. Look at the design and common coding issues and applying those. When they run those scans, you're going to find out if they exist. If you have that in your model and your outputs, well, you were right. But what you want to get to is not only you can prove that, but you also want to be able to give that information so it can be dealt with so it doesn't show up in your scan.
Right.
So
You
as you
improve the model.
progress in your
Right.
maturity,
You
continue to
improve the
model.
model
Yeah,
over and over. Because
over and over
models
again that it does
aren't
have that
done.
value.
They're not
Mhm.
point in time. You probably had this somewhere in the past ones, but I'm going to reiterate. A model is not a point in time thing. It's a
No.
living, breathing representation of the design and its security characteristics and properties. And
Mhm.
so if your testing shows that your model is incomplete in some way, well, then you refine the model so that, and then that doesn't show up, as you just said,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, absolutely.
It's all
So those,
part of the process of building in security and continuing to do that.
yeah, and a couple other things too, like we talked about providing validation, the controls are implemented. We know that things are working. Other things too is what we learn from designs, and this kind of goes back to some earlier things, is thinking about what are some of the policies that we may have in place? Do we need to adjust those? Do we need to start factoring in other standards and reference architectures? Like, why do I keep seeing this pattern over and over again? Let's build a pattern that's secure that we know is going to be built in a way that's very resilient. And we work with our architects, we work with our developers, we work with those teams to have that. Here in terms of scans and stuff, we'll have a better understanding of code. We'll have a better understanding of things that are happening so we can educate on that. I think there's a lot that we learn from this in this validation process around, hey, did we do a good job? And in that aspect, we can do that. And of course, too, as we talked about what to go test, I think also too, when we start seeing more and more and we start looking at it as a whole in terms of an application portfolio, what is our baseline of things? What do we always know that we want to test for? Can we automate things? Can we make things more efficient in our testing processes? How do we improve? So we'll start discovering stuff. And also too, I know a lot when I've done a lot of pen testing in the past, it's around scoping, right? You always have that call with the pen tester or pen testing groups. I always want to know the scope. What am I testing, right? This really helps in that aspect. I remember the very first time I had a pen test run. This was years and years and years ago. It's like, oh, don't we test the whole thing? And they're like, we can. It's going to cost more and take longer. I'm like, okay. So then I figured out, I was like, with some guidance of mentors and other people more experienced, it was like, no, we need to check here, here, and here, and here. Let's do that. Your threat model will help you do that, right? I mean, that's one of the great outputs is like saying, hey, here's this. It helps that scope. And as you
Yeah,
mentioned, of course, testing is proof of the model, right?
it
That it
is,
is
but
valid, it
even
is
more
real.
so, good pen testers, and remember, every pen test is actually bespoke.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry to say that you really can't compare pen tests unless they're really working on the same team, share the same knowledge base. Nah, they got to choose their own tools. It's pretty
Yeah.
bespoke, which is good because
Hmm.
attacks are bespoke. But on the other hand, did they do the right stuff? Well, so that's a problem. But
Yeah.
nevertheless, good pen testers build a model. They may not call that, and they don't do everything we say in the model, but they certainly have to figure out attack surfaces and threats
Hmm.
in order. That's part of pen testing. So they're building models. So you give them a model and they can look at what you did. Then they often then look for themselves and say, and it's a very interesting process, very
Take,
tied, very
take
loopy. The
Yeah, take that back from your testers as well to incorporate into your model. Like, oh, well, they're looking at it this way. Ah, we need to think about that too.
Yes,
That loop, as you
exactly.
mentioned, is key, right? So let's start working with them. So we did an app a while back, and we were brought in kind of late, and they were already testing, and it was kind of funny. It was like everything we identified showed up on the pen test. I was like,
Yeah.
oh, okay, proof, right? But nonetheless, it's like taking that feedback and incorporating that as we look at our models. So one of the things that as we're working on a particular modules of an application, we can use that, right? So kind of that concept, and we can then talk with the testers as they progress to say, hey, what can we bring back in terms of our scope? I want to go
Can I
back.
just,
Yeah.
John, can I just highlight some of the things you talked about, like then building this into reference architectures and standards? That's very mature stuff. And I don't want to
Yes.
scare viewers off to say, oh, well, we don't have reference architectures, we have one architecture. That's fine. What John's talking about, John works in a very large organization with
Yeah.
thousands of developers and
Oh
hundreds
yeah.
of
Keep going.
concurrent projects. And I've been there, you know that.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And that's a very different environment than a small organization that has one or two products and one or two or three trains of development. And it's okay if you don't have a reference architecture. But if you are in a bigger organization, start thinking about grabbing those standards and making them standards. So you just make threat modeling a lot easier for everybody. You take away some problems.
Yeah, and I think even if you are in a small organization, I think even with building some of that can help lead to better designs as your product is enhanced, as you add new features. Like, okay, so we're building it this way. New technology comes out. We want to make it more efficient. We want to speed things up, make things more resilient. I kind of have a base to build off of. So like we can't do that when we look at this model. And so let's build a new reference to go with. We're moving to the cloud, right? Lift and shift. That's okay, fine. But when I want to refactor to take advantage of new services, what should that look like for our organization? And you have opportunities for that, even if you only have a few products in your small organization. It's a little different in terms of scale, but you still have an opportunity to just apply it at a very small level. So that way, when you look at how we're going to use a particular cloud technology or service, you can have at least a standard way that for those few products you have can apply it. And you can have a common set of controls, making it easier to manage, even if it's only five things, right? So I think you even have use cases, but yes, in a very large organization where we have thousands of architects and tens and thousands of developers and thousands upon thousands of products that are being used in all kinds of different situations, right? Having that is a really, really good thing to have. And so building that through this is certainly a big thing. I
And
want to go back to slide two, but
I do want to repeat what Steve Atchison told me in 2001. Brook,
mhm,
always try to make the easy path the secure path. And
yeah,
that's part of what we're talking about, whether it's a
yeah,
small organization or a large organization. Making the easy path the secure path means that if people can get what they need to get done, in the way that is standard and has
yeah,
already been vetted and thought about, you've eliminated a lot of potential for error.
yeah. Yeah, I wanted to go back just briefly to talk about this on some of the supporting groups, security ops, incident response, and threat intelligence. Just briefly, that this will give you a better perspective if you're able to, if you have this, to look at what are the things that have been going on in your environment. What kind of attacks are these teams seeing? What is threat intelligence seeing out in the world? What campaigns are going on? So we had a mobile application that was kind of a high profile, and there was certainly a lot of threat intelligence that we were able to leverage to think about this particular product and its use. So we're able to apply that. And it's actually how we were brought into threat model, the particular product was because of the concerns they had over particular campaigns that were out there. So this really, these things too, kind of on both a reactive and a proactive approach, work with those teams because that knowledge together brings so much more. One of the big things in like security ops, incident response is use cases, right? Those attacks, those threats, build content to help them,
That's your
right?
threat
Look at what their
library.
detection rules are. And
Yeah,
it
that's your
really,
threat library. That's your threat
yeah,
library. That's the active,
absolutely.
at least in the current situation. So that ought to prioritize when you're looking at threats, what really matters.
Absolutely.
If
Yeah.
you are lucky enough to have a security operations center, by the
Yeah.
way.
And even
So
if you're
again, I want
using
to
a
dig
managed
to that.
service or something, you still
Yeah.
have conversations that
Gotta.
will help you because I can feed that to somebody who may be doing that for me, right? You can still
Yeah.
work on those things. So these are kind of things too to think about. This helps expand your program, adds value in other areas. They support you, you're supporting them, better buy-in from leadership, more chances to expand and grow. Um, and then from there, just a little bit about the cloud. We always send cloud technologies, all the kind of fun stuff. This also too is areas where it's really kind of, just goes hand in hand with products and it's really kind of applies in many of the same ways that we are doing. It's just that what it boils down to in the cloud, it just helps them understand risk associated with the applications because they can be deployed in so many different ways now with the technologies that we face. It's not just a web application server and a database, and then you got a GUI front end, back end. That's it. Maybe an API to talk to something else to pull in data. It's so complex now. So we can look at how we threat model those things, and I think there's a lot of ways, and we have to keep up to date with that. So I just pointed out a couple of things. Get your cloud teams involved with what you're doing. Um, ultimately, it's one big, huge ecosystem that we all have a part in. A lot of times, we're still kind of immature in certain areas where we don't know about the finer details of how things work. Microservices, app functions, things like Lambda, so on and so forth. I think a lot of us now are understanding that more and more, but still, it's like, how do we work with those teams and make sure we do that? And then where do those get leveraged? Can we put this as part of our DevSecOps process?
Sure.
Where do we leverage that as well? And sort of just,
Well, and you have to know the DevSec. I mean, again, the pipeline's important too. It's
yeah,
it's all part of it. So are we saying threat model everything? In a way, John, we
yeah,
are. Now, but again, I want to say if you haven't started, I always like to say, remember, if nobody's threat modeling, all that vulnerability is going into your design and you're getting whatever ad hoc. So if you threat
yeah,
model and people find one thing that they close, you were better today than you were yesterday. So don't mean
absolutely.
John is really being very, very, very holistic here, and you must at the same time, if this is scary, don't get scared, just start.
Hmm.
It will come. But remember, being
Yeah.
comprehensive and holistic is where you want to get to.
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of times these other groups, they have SMEs in place, right? And if you don't know about it, and it's this big scary thing, talk to them, understand what they're doing so you can incorporate this stuff. You help each other. You learn, they learn, like I said, one big ecosystem, and that collaboration really helps us move forward and actually moves the needle on progress, even if it's one thing. It's the thing that you didn't have yesterday, as you mentioned, Brooke, right? So that's, you're making progress. And that's ultimately what we all want to do in security. We want to move the needle, make things more secure. We want to do that things, but without working together and actually understanding what people do, we're not going to get there. We have got to collaborate and not throw things over the fence. I'm a big believer in like we have to partner, not police. So
And you know what we're trying for. I'm gonna go theoretical on you, John, a little bit, because you
yeah,
know I love to do that. And what we're trying for here is a security architecture. That means a planned and cohesive and working together set of security things that
hmm,
build our defense in depth. The
yeah,
threat model is the way. I'm really going to say that, and I mean that in capital letters, the way.
hmm,
But it's the path to secure designs, securer designs, better
yeah,
designs, take security in. And if we're lucky and privileged enough and have enough time, actually building a security architecture that then can support change, elasticity, a
Yep.
little bit of churn, and probably resist a whole lot of incidents and make them minor instead of major. And have
Yeah.
I been part of this? I have seen such architectures. This is possible. It's not pie in the sky.
Yeah. It's very true, and I think that's, when you look at from a program perspective of threat modeling, it's making those connections, finding these supporting groups, right? They enhance what you do, you enhance what they do. It really becomes this value that's distributed over so much that just everybody improves as a result of this. So your program is continuing to deliver more value across your organization, not in this just small scoped area, but you have the opportunity, even if you're a small organization, talk to your testers, talk to your any managed service providers you may be leveraging, talk to that maybe it's just that one person, right? Whoever that is, you can add more value as a result of your modeling, and it just grows the program, even if it's small, right? You're adding more value to what you're doing. And that's kind
And
of the
your
key
models
thing.
get better. By the way, your models get better, your base documents get better. As John
Yeah.
said, the standards, the reference architectures, the easy path to security all get better.
Hmm.
All of this is brought in. Yeah, it's complex, but what we do is complex. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Can't get
Yeah.
out of that.
We live in this security domain, and then, especially on the AppSec side, you have to deal with so much more. It's not just like network architecture, it's a lot of complexities, but
Oh,
one bite at a
John's showing
time.
his
Start
age.
small.
Network architectures. Back when I was made
I was just
system
say when you
architect,
started, Brook.
very first application security architect, everything was about networks and malware and worms.
Yeah.
They told me, Brooke, I know it's a little step down from the design work you're doing now for security, but would you take this job? We really need it filled. And because application security wasn't considered all that important. Well,
Yeah. No, it wasn't.
you're showing your age, John, because we're along. Not don't forget networks though.
No, of course not. Right. You don't, but it's like it's another piece in the puzzle, right? And so with that, just another supporting group training. I wanted to talk briefly about that because if you're in an organization, certainly of the one size that I'm at, but maybe not, but you probably have some kind of training program. It might be very small. Work with the people that have these learning platforms and events that they do. Leverage the ways that they work to reach audiences because you don't have to reinvent the wheel, when it comes to training. I think, some of the things that we think about, and it's also a key element in your program. And I talked about that in episode 2 with Irene, and around like, what should that look like and what should that be? But just in terms of, expansion and driving the program, tap into the stuff, share it across your organization, partner with your awareness teams if you have those, or any kind of, communication teams. Put this out there so people can understand it. Keep it simple. I use a lot of simple things, and our team has also helped to develop more of that around, and to do that. So really, kind of help these things promote and help people learn, understand basics. It'll spark curiosity as well. And now you have another group to help promote and to share what it is that you do. So just wanted to touch lightly on that.
Well,
And
I'll point out that threat modeling training, we tend to focus on the people who are going to be key to threat modeling. But
yeah.
really, if you can afford it, train everybody that's involved in software development or any part of this.
Hmm.
They won't become great threat modelers, even project managers. But there's something really powerful about introducing, letting people play with attacks and defenses that brings the whole of
Yeah,
application
absolutely.
security into focus in a way that I haven't found anything else that does it that well, that
Yeah.
quickly. And so you get this culture of security that then supports your threat modeling and everything else you got to do.
Yeah, it helps with the culture shift because a lot of times that's what you really need as you look at threat modeling as the activity and then as you look at it as a program because it's really a lot of mindset work that you've got to work on. So With that, here's the slide here, privacy by design. I think maybe most of us understand that privacy is different than security. Sometimes there's some contradictions and conflicts around that. There's a lot of some frameworks out there. Some people that we know, Brook, that have done a really good job about this. We don't have time, and it would be a whole other webinar sessions of diving into this topic. But
Get Kim to come on. She'd be
what's
happy.
that?
Get Kim to
Oh, well,
come
yeah,
on.
we could maybe I'll do
Andrew
another
Ringgold is
three-part
our
session
friend.
with Kim.
Yeah.
Kim Watts, Dr. Kim Watts, actually. So she's one of the founding leaders, I would say, around the privacy by design and threat modeling. That
Yeah.
Linden is a privacy framework for threat modeling, by the way, if you want to go and research more of that. But that's another area where your program can get into when we start looking at how we expand and support one another, because that can be incorporated. I think that's another element where we see a lot of supports. I know we're getting close to the top of the hour here. These threat models can help these teams meet, some of the requirements as we look at the design of the application. How do we incorporate privacy? I just want to kind of mention this here. I didn't necessarily want to go deep into it, but the things that we use to build our models are the same things that those teams are using to look at how they design the privacy and deal with the privacy requirements of the products that are going out there. And I think it's important to realize that that is happening. So why not leverage this as well? So we've talked to our privacy and risk departments, et cetera, around like, oh, here's what we can do. And they're like, oh my gosh, how do we incorporate this into our practice? Like, okay, well, let's figure that out. We're not a huge team, so we have to be, pick and choose, right? So, and you may not even have a risk privacy team. I don't know. It just depends on the size of your organization. But still, even then, you can incorporate some of those elements into what it is. You'll understand the app, its functions, its data flows, where does certain kinds of data live. You're halfway there, right? You are halfway there, and then look at how those things matter. And I don't know, Brooke, maybe we should consider one of those things, and maybe bring in Kim and some other folks to talk about that. It is quite the topic.
Yeah, and it's as you said, privacy has grown into its own discipline. It used
Yeah,
to be us security people who did privacy because
yeah,
nobody else did it. But that's long since not being true. It's its own, and I
yeah,
would say I'm a privacy expert, even though I deal
yeah,
with it, of course. But yeah, threat modeling helps.
yeah.
Ask
It does.
Dr. Kim.
Yeah,
So
Dr.
here's the
Kim.
takeaways. What do we got here? Like John said, keep scale in mind with everything you do, or you can get burnt, as I told my little story, in ways you don't expect.
Yeah,
I learned hard to do that because of the things that failed as we scaled. Um,
yeah.
and I didn't mean to rhyme, but there you have it.
The system process, staying on top of what you're doing, you just kind of need to have that visibility, plan for growth as part of your program, no matter how small, no matter how large. Be aware of those things that can happen and really go, okay, if I am doing this many more models, what do I need? If I have multiple groups I'm connecting to, what does that mean? Who are my stakeholders? Feedback all along the way. Like I said, we just had a meeting last week with one of the directors over a product line. He was like, wow, this is great. They got feedback from other security folks on like, it's like we're refining our reporting based on that feedback, and it's making it more consumable for those that need the information. And so that's a huge step for us. And show and measure value. Keep it simple. I think that that is good. And as we spoke about other programs that can benefit from these outputs, right? And the last one here is ensure your program is providing value beyond the model itself. I know we got some questions coming in, Brooke. I think number 7 is really interesting because we so hyper focus on the modeling activity in itself. But as we've talked about this, as you and I have kind of gone through this so far in the session, that really, we start seeing where things plug in, how our testing teams are working, how our SOC and investigations, um, that when that starts popping into these other areas and we adding that value, there's so much more, that threat modeling can become. especially in your program as you drive the program. It expands into other areas. And that's kind of one of the things that we focus on now is how do we collaborate with those teams? So
It's a
we have a lot of
keystone
effort
activity.
that we do.
It's a keystone activity. So,
Yeah.
so yeah, the threat model, we need it in order to do a secure design. It's true,
Yeah.
but it can do so much more for you.
Yeah.
I think that's your point, John,
Yeah. Absolutely.
it's really keystone. It gets a culture of security going. It connects a whole lot of dots in a holistic manner and comprehensive manner, and for all these teams that can be behind silos. So yeah, it's really breaks down those silos.
Yeah. We got a couple of questions here from Claire. I'm just going to kind of read a couple of these out loud. Does it matter how small does it matter how small you start?
No,
There are a lot of teams listed on a slide, like security ops, threat intelligence, and others. We're a small firm, so our roles cross over a lot, and we don't have defined teams in that way yet. But I'm creating a program, and I was thinking I need to start it myself before looping in others. What approach do you suggest is best for a smaller company that still cares about security? I'm going to
yeah,
say, start it yourself. Start
yeah.
doing
Show
it.
value. Most
Show the
important thing.
value.
Show value.
Start
Show
really, yeah.
as things start to get better, and you connect the dots in your thinking. If you're just
Mhm.
all alone, if you connect the dots, your threat model is more comprehensive. That shows value across all these disciplines, and then other people will connect the dots and see it too,
Yeah,
begin to think holistically. So, and
absolutely.
again, I go into something like McAfee where there are 5,000 developers and 250 concurrent projects, and the first thing I do is threat model myself and deliver a
Yeah.
couple of threat models, and people go, "Oh, wow, that's really cool." And the people who are threat modeling going, "Oh, I want to link up with Brook because and suddenly you got a program out of nothing.
Yeah, and starting small is very normal, especially, I remember starting out, it's like, okay, we want to try this thing. Well, what is this thing? All right. So we just make one or two models. Right? Even in a large organization, it's still the same approach. Do it, show it. What value do we get? Oh, okay, this is starting to make sense. What do we do a couple more? Oh, what are we finding now? What about, let's get feedback.
Just John saying, exactly.
It's the same thing, just you don't have as many people. And if you have crossovers, that's fine too, because work with those that have those other roles, right? Um, and then we have another thing here, not really a question, but a comment. I agree with your earlier points about visibility. We're lucky that people see the value in threat modeling here at the finance company, but sharing data and feedback can be really challenging. Any final advice? Ooh.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
Oh, this
Well,
is the bane of my existence when it comes to security and sharing information. I think you have to work on breaking down some barriers of that because I think one of I used to work incident response. And as an example, that information is held so close to the chest and is not shared, period. It's like, nope, you don't know anything about it. We're not going to talk about it. You have to find a way to get your IR leaders to share not details per se, anonymize the data, see if they can provide you a little insight that isn't exposing so much that causes that kind of grief. If you're working with various apps, talk to the various app owners around these things and see if they're willing to share key points. Not everything, not every finding, but key areas of focus. Like, okay, so we are discovering in this area, these are the kinds of things that we were focusing in on. Start small in what you can share and see how you can build relationships that will allow for more. And you
well,
build
I want to say about incidents, the technical people, the fault that caused the beginning of the incident, somebody was successful enough to create an incident, an attacker, an adversary, and that
yeah,
little piece of information is really important because that's very important for your threat model.
yeah.
That's the key
And
information. Where did it
yeah,
get started? And how did it start? And what failed that allowed the adversary to even get a toehold or a
yeah.
beginning, even if it was contained? really important.
Yeah, it really is. And I think when you start explaining the values, gains, and what it's doing, I think you might be able to get a bit more of an inroad into why. And I think the big thing is understanding the why. When I worked incident response, a lot of times there are special NDAs that are signed. So you can be read in on something, things become confidential. It involves usually legal and so on and so forth. And there may be opportunities for something like that you can then take some of that information, not to disclose, but to incorporate in a way that you can, have that as potential threats that you can apply to your modeling processes.
And I'm going to jump in here very quickly because we're right at the end and I have
Yeah,
another meeting. But I remind, and they get tired of my nag, but about every 6 months, I remind everyone that the stuff we talk about as the community in threat modeling can be quite sensitive. And it's
yeah,
not for your Facebook page. It's not for telling your spouse. It's not for telling your partner. It's not for telling your whatever. It's really company sensitive stuff. And that we're all responsible for that. And while people get tired of my little, 6 monthly notices, you always have new people. They need to hear that. Everybody needs to be reminded, including me, that this is can be really sensitive. That's okay. We can hold
yeah,
sensitive stuff, you know.
yeah. Absolutely. It's always going to be a challenge. I think you just got to start building some strong relationships and find ways that you can get enough information, start small with it, and say, okay, these are the kinds of attacks we're seeing. Don't approach it like, I want details of your incident. It's like, what are the kinds of things that you see? What are common things that are coming, And that's kind of how I've started it with our teams is like, so in threat intel, what are you seeing in terms of campaigns? What do you see out there? I talk to IR. What are the kinds of attacks that you're noticing? I don't ask for specifics. It's just like, hey, well, we see a lot of brute force. We see a lot of this. We see a lot of that. You build a strong relationship, and then they begin to open up with an understanding that this is not shared outside. It's confidential internal stuff. So
Yeah. Yeah.
I hope that helps. I've got a few more minutes that I can hang around. Brooke, I know you need to leave. So if anybody
Yeah,
else has
I've
more
got a meeting,
questions,
unfortunately, with a client, so
yeah,
so dasn't be late or too late. But thank you
yeah,
very much for including me, John. It's always such
yeah.
enlightening as well as such a pleasure. It was
Oh,
great to see
absolutely. Thank
you
you, Brooke.
live and in person last week.
Yeah.
Really enjoyed that, and I'm sure we'll be talking. But just so everyone knows, John and I do this not for webinars. We sit and talk about this stuff
Yeah,
on a
we
regular basis.
do. Yeah, many times, and I'm sure we'll do many more. And I'm sure there'll be more webinars and things in our future too, as well. I think you mentioned
Sure.
something that you wanted to do.
Well,
So
thank you for including me, and I
yeah,
hope it
no,
was
and
useful to the audience. Everybody
yeah.
take care and have a
All right,
great day
thank you, Brooke. We really
wherever you
appreciate it.
are.
Okay, if there are any more questions, I know there's still some people here. If you want to ask, please feel free to ask away. I've got a couple more minutes. Um, I don't know if we can unmute people, Claire. I'm not really sure about that, but if you want to put that in chat or
We
send.
can. We can. There's been no more questions through to me on the chat or on the Q&A. But
Okay.
yeah, people should have the ability to raise their hand if they want to speak, and we can.
Ah,
Oh,
all
there we
right, so
go.
we have somebody. So
Christoph.
Christoph. Oh,
Okay. Oh, no. Maybe he was just testing. He's
oh.
gone.
Anybody else? Quiet.
Looks like
Okay.
it's a wrap.
All right. Well, thank you for attending, everyone. We really appreciate it. As Claire mentioned, the recording will be made available. She provided some really good links for the next episodes. The next one that's coming up, although it says session series 6, we've had to change some order up in terms of the presenters and content, just due to scheduling, things are going on. So, which is not a problem. These last two sessions, basically the order of them doesn't matter quite as much, but they still do build with each other. So you'll still have that same building and value. So we really appreciate your time. Thanks for joining us, and I look forward to seeing you all again on our next session coming up in December. So it's not too far away. So enjoy your day, and you've got contact information. Stuff will be posted. So feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn, and look forward to our next one.
Thank you very much, John.
All
Thanks,
right.
everybody.
Thanks, everyone.